Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Hope Dorman, and I'm a member of the industry marketing team here at House. Just for some housekeeping, if you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. For this Innovator Series webinar, we'd like to introduce Richard Duncan of the Center for Universal Design in North Carolina. He has spent 35 years working in architectural accessibility and universal design in residential and public environments. His experience is with costs, materials, and community design for people with disabilities in aging households. We're excited to have the chance for him to share his knowledge with renovation pros who are looking to incorporate more universal design into their work. So I'll hand the presentation off to him now.
Thanks, Hope. And thanks to the House team for inviting me to speak to you all today. It's a great opportunity to communicate some new ideas in design we think that'll be useful for everyone watching. I come to you from the Better Living Design Institute, world headquarters in Asheville, North Carolina. We're all about promoting and working on home design that we think really better meets the 21st century demographic that we're all living in and experiencing. And we think that there are great opportunities for the remodeling industry, categorized broadly, to take advantage of what we're talking about and really meet the needs, in some cases hidden needs, of clients and potential clients. So that'll be our topic today. We'll be contrasting what we're talking about with traditional standard home design, and in particular, especially accessible home design, because there's some confusions in there we'd like to clear up. I think that you'll be better off with the understandings that we'll be coming up with for you today. So we're going to jump right in and just show you a couple of examples of homes just to get us started and traveling down the path here. This is an image here showing a home, happens to have been a tear down house in a Seattle neighborhood. It's a pretty good example of a UD house, or we'd like to call it a Better Living Design house. And a couple of things I'd like to point out just for you to keep in mind. One is that it's a multi-story house. One of the misconceptions about the work that we do in the homes we're talking about is that it all has to be single level home, or all has to be ranch style housing, or even slab on grade homes. Not the case. This is a house that's got a step-free entrance coming in the front, a step-free entrance in the walkout basement, and multi-stories, and I'll show you a little bit more about how this works out from a Better Living Design and universal design perspective a little bit later on, but keep this image in mind and we'll come back to it. Another image here is of a house in a newer neighborhood. It happens to be in North Carolina. Looks a lot like the other homes in the neighborhood. That's one of the key differentiators of universal homes and Better Living Design homes, is that it needs to look like typical housing that it's being compared to in its own neighborhood and community. And marketability is key to be successful for us and key for successful outcomes for a universal house. And we think this house compares very favorably to all the other homes in the neighborhood, but it is a great example of a universal house. And you know, like the other house, this has 2 stories. There's a bonus room over the garage. You can see stairs coming up to the front. It's not that we don't have stairs in BLD homes or UD houses, but we always have to have at least one way in the house that doesn't require the use of stairs. That's one of the bottom line characteristics and criteria that we have. So we'll be talking more about each of these things as we go forward, but I wanted to give you a little flavor initially about some of the housing that we're talking about. So the definition of universal design is pretty simple. The design of all products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for specialized design. It really is about mainstreaming improved functionality into products, in the case of homes, into building materials, home products, appliances, fixtures, all the things that go into homes, and the overall design of the house in a way that has a very mainstreamed appearance and hence is quite marketable, but with these improved functions that we'll talk about going forward. So that's the shorthand definition of universal design. We'll start talking about the perceived need for this kind of home and the perceived need for this kind of housing nationally. One of the big constituency groups that's mentioned quite often by folks is the numbers of folks who have disabling conditions. And the generally accepted number is 20% of all Americans having some kind of disability. That's an over 60 million figure right now. That's a big number. Folks, I think, appropriately talk about that as a reason why our homes should be better reflecting our society. That number wasn't so big 100 years ago. It has grown to this level now, and it may level off going forward, but probably not decline by very much going forward as well. So clearly a key group that we need to be looking at as in terms of who's going to be benefiting from this. Even though we're talking mainstream, folks with extreme human performance characteristics really can take particular advantage of the features in the homes we're talking about. This next slide shows the other key constituency group, really the one that's overwhelmed many markets and many industries these days, which is the aging of our population. Everyone's heard about this. It truly is a big number, and clearly lots of older folks can take particular advantage of the features that we have in universal and better living design homes and housing. Just one figure to throw out at you that's extracted from this and other statistics is in the year 2020, there's supposed to be 55 million people over the age of 65. By 2050, there's supposed to be nearly 90 million people over the age of 65. So that's really nearly doubling in this century, and a huge increase even in the 30 years between 2020 and 2050. So we think they're a key constituency group for this. We think that they matter, and we think that the growth is astounding and should be turning people's heads in the housing industry. Let's look more at this need. We've talked about the 20% of the population, people with disabilities. We've talked about the rapidly aging population. We've talked about demographic changes that actually extend way back to 1900, when the average life expectancy was only 47 years. By 2050, I'm sure it'll be up in the 80s. We know that it's an international phenomenon worldwide. And the last thing to mention here, I think, is very significant, is that while we have these two big constituency groups that do matter and that can take real advantage of the features in the homes we're talking about, don't really represent the reason why people should be thinking about this kind of housing. Because in fact, we've needed homes like this, homes with features like this for many, many decades. Right now, what we're looking at is an urgent situation. And so it's the urgency of the demographics that really should be driving people's interest. Because in fact, there's lots of other folks, average, everyday, mainstream individuals and households who can take advantage of features in universal and better living homes, not just folks we might traditionally think of as fitting a particular niche, somebody with a disability, somebody who's older. They matter, but they're not the whole reason. And here's some examples. So this is our mainstream household, young family, couple of kids, not thinking at all about anything to do with aging issues or accidents that may put them at risk or cause them to function differently in their homes and in their daily lives. We think they actually can be an important market for universal design, and I'll tell you some reasons why. So let's not ignore them. So it's not just older folks, it's not just folks with chronic disabling conditions. You could market this to a younger family as well. Who wouldn't appreciate a step-free entrance into the house with strollers, with young kids, with bikes, with packages? Makes a big difference in people's lives. I can tell you from living in houses with and without step-free entrances, it's certainly true. And while I'm nearing that age group myself of getting into that 65 plus before too long, I can really appreciate some of those features. So, families of all ages can really benefit from the features that we're talking about. And because they're mainstreamed, it's not going to really be something that they should be shying away from. How about this guy? You may have a customer or a client who may look like this guy. Maybe he's a little bit more sensitized to the issues of, sleeping on the living room couch because you can't get up the stairs for a couple of months, or having to take baths, in the backyard with a hose because there's no full bathroom on the first floor. Maybe it's a good opportunity for you to be able to convince them that they need to think about some of these issues more seriously. Movers. Rarely think about movers in terms of home design. It takes less time. It's also less of a hassle. They have to use fewer people, less effort getting in and out of the house. Lots of folks can take advantage of this. And frankly, entrances are an easy get for this, because when you compare a home with steps, a home with a step-free entrance, and a home with a ramp, the comparison's pretty obvious of which you might prefer to have. Now, here's a household that we're told is increasingly frequent in number in our society. It's maybe a multi-generational household. And interestingly, it may not be the oldest members of that household who might be the ones who are most interested in pursuing a UD agenda when they're doing a renovation. Maybe it's a bathroom, maybe it's an addition on the first floor, maybe it's a kitchen. It turns out that older folks, for reasons I'll mention in a second, may not be as interested in pursuing this in every case. It may be the adult members, the adult children of the household who may be able to see with some more objectivity kind of what's coming up down the line for the people nearest and dearest to them. But certainly the proliferation of these kinds of household represent an opportunity. And here's one of our big constituency groups. Okay, here you go, older folks. And indeed, there is an uptick, we're told, in the numbers of older households who are requesting these kinds of features in their home. Not really commensurate with the growth in the demographics quite yet. So we're not there in terms of the awareness, in terms of people understanding that when they're attempting perhaps a regular standard renovation, they could add some of these other features, but we're getting there. These folks will often talk about not needing features until later, don't want to do anything now, I'll do something later. And in almost every case, that means not doing anything at all until it's too late and they're forced with some emergency situation that's suboptimal in terms of getting the kinds of outcomes they want from their house. So a tough sell in some cases, but in other cases, they might be very sensitized and ready to listen to a persuasive argument about including some ease of use and convenience features they might not have thought about or even known about before. And finally, here's the other key constituency group. You know, he's a guy with a family, uses a wheelchair. Clearly, he'll be more interested in accessibility features, which is these custom features tailored just to him. But if you're clever and you can communicate effectively, your skill sets may be able to convince them and include real UD stuff at the same time. I mean, a step-free entrance is a step-free entrance for everybody. So those are some of the folks we think that UD features will work for. And of course, we're about having this be able to be sold to, marketed to, and used by with great effectiveness. You know, people from all walks of life, of all ages, of all sizes and shapes. So let's take another look at this kind of demand question. We've taken a look at the potential market who's actually asking for this kind of stuff and what's their purpose and what's their situation. As we say, older folks can be a key constituency and it's growing so much it'd be shameful not to pay attention to them. AARP does a survey of their members every 2 years. And among many other questions, they ask them, where would you like to be aging in the future? And for, I'd say, 30 years, the same answer has come back year after year. Between 80 and 90% of people say, I want to age in the house I'm in right now. That should speak loudly. Sounds to me like a big market opportunity. The ex-head of AARP moved over to Georgetown University to a research institute there and did an additional piece of research that talked to some of the same kinds of folks, older folks, and of the folks who said, yeah, I want to stay in the house I'm in now, they were asking, well, what are you doing about it? Turns out, not surprisingly to a lot of us in the field, a lot of people say they'd like to stay in the house they're in now, but don't do a whole lot of really authentic, groundbreaking work to make it happen. So they kind of sit there looking at their situation, but not really feeling the compulsion to pull the trigger. And that's where we can all play a role, is to get those folks to tip over from wanting to have a quality of life outcome like aging in place, but not being able to figure what they need to do and what they may be able to do about it. Other surveys from the AIA reveal that like similar surveys for the remodeling industry, like more and more businesses and firms are hearing from their customers and clients who are requesting these kinds of things. 61% in 2017 of the AIA folks surveyed said that they were seeing requests from clients like this in residential situations. Those requests are increasing also. So there is some uptick in that, just not nearly as much as we think is probably needed. We know also that there are still building 50+ development communities out there. What's important to know is that less than 5% of all older Americans will ever live in a retirement community. Remember that 80 to 90% don't want to age in place? Well, 5% don't. They want to move, and that's fine. Um, but in spite of what you might think about masses of people moving within their state of out of state to specific retirement situations, turns out not that many folks are doing that. And there's only 1.4 million residents of nursing homes, only 600,000 living in high-end CCRC communities, and only about 800,000 who are living in assisted living communities. So that leaves a huge amount of these older Americans who are living in homes they'd like to stay in, and we need to be helping them figure out how to make that happen. And as everybody else, it's not just maybe the family members in the homes that they're in now, but it may also be friends and relatives who come to visit. So we have a big need, some growing demand, and really a lack of other housing options for a lot of the 80 to 90% of folks who say they want to be in the house they're in now in the long term of whatever age, really. And that's where renovated homes can really play a big role. So let's talk a little bit about what UD is and isn't, because there's a lot of confusion about this, and this is really why we created the Better Living Design Institute, so we could define what we think is a very usable and applicable idea about design and not get people confused. Because I think that UD is variously understood and imperfectly understood by lots of folks, and there's no central clearinghouse. So it's not accessible design, it's not visible design. People may have heard of this. It's not ADA compliant. That really has not that much to do with the 1 to 3 family housing that we focus on mostly. It's not barrier free. That's really an old-fashioned term. It's not specialized, literally by definition. It's not specialized design. It's not assistive technology, which is more associated with accessibility features, nor is it handicapped. That's really a phrase that is also quite outmoded and old-fashioned. It's not a new age euphemism either. People tend to dump kind of anything accessible or maybe more user-friendly into this bucket of universal design without really knowing that much about it. Well, it isn't any of those things. Applied to housing, it has some very particular components to it, including this marketability feature, which we're talking about so much today. So it's not any of these things, and we'll get closer and closer around what we're talking about with specifics. Here's a comparison. We know about homes with stairs. Most of us grew up in them. Most of us live in homes with stairs, and if we're unlucky enough to need them, ramps are really the one way to get people in and out of a house who have trouble climbing stairs. And this is a extremely common view in almost any neighborhood in America at one time or another. It's a unattractive wooden ramp tacked onto the front of the house, which no one wishes they had to use, and which will certainly go away as soon as the need goes away, and which will not become part of the permanently more usable housing stock of the country. This, unfortunately, is what people think of when they think about the features we're talking about. If you mention universal design, this may be conjured up. If you mention features in homes that may be required by folks who are older, this may be the image they have. And of course, it's a reason why people can recoil from that whole idea, and why they mentally put off considering what to do about their own aging selves in their homes, and the mismatch that's obviously there for as long as possible, usually until it's too late. So we'll have to contrast this with a much more, I think, pleasant view, which is happens to have been a newly constructed home, but it could have been a renovated home as well. It shows a house with stairs. Again, we don't mind stairs going up to a front porch, but the front porch is virtually level with the first floor of the house, and it's covered. Those are important features in the entry options of a UD or BLD house. It's got a gentle sloping pathway that goes from right to left, then curves around behind those mandina bushes there and gets you up to the first floor. Very unobtrusive, difficult to suggest how somebody might look at that and say, boy, that's really a feature I don't want in my house. And it works well and looks good, which is one of our key components. And we can look at something that's very accessible. This is a kitchen that was designed for people who were the primary homemaker and who were seated. It's got no base cabinet, so someone can pull up underneath, and it may work very well for the individuals for whom it was intended, but it is certainly not a mainstream image of a kitchen, and not something that you could market to most of the households who we have mentioned up until now. This is, again, what people may have in their minds as they are contemplating some of the things they need, and of
course, a mainstream household doesn't really have much of a use for features like that. And they'd run the other way. So you have to overcome some of these misconceptions people have, and we think better living design is actually a piece of that. This is actually a kitchen that we had a hand in the creation of, not in the design of. That is kind of a mixed bag. It's a halfway between a fully accessible kitchen, what we might consider to be a UD kitchen. It's someone's kind of mistaken attempt at providing a more visually acceptable design outcome, but still missing the mark on something that has mainstream acceptability. So some features that I'll point out. So you've got a couple of high toe spaces. So these are specifically designed for and included in homes that are designed to be accessible with a primary homemaker who's using the kitchen to use as a wheelchair. And they're needed in only a few cases where you've got a very tight space. You need some turning space that you may not be able to get. Otherwise, this kitchen doesn't need them. They're more expensive. They have reduced storage, not necessary in a UD kitchen. Conversions can happen later, but if you're trying to sell this kind of thing to a mainstream audience, this is not going to help. Also, what won't help is a piece of permanently open knee space underneath the kitchen sink, usable only by folks who need to pull up underneath it or who can't stand for very long and need to sit, and that might be absolutely a possibility, but not to a mainstream household in many cases, and that's what we're thinking about foremost. Again, wasted storage space. Needed, more expensive. They could have gotten away with absolutely standard cabinets. We like the front controls on the floor-mounted range. Front controls in general are a big improvement. Safety, ergonomics. You don't have to reach over to the back of the stove to manipulate most or all of the controls, and we do like that. We also have positive feelings about a raised dishwasher. We realize that for a lot of households that won't be probably quite market acceptable now, but it's something that we see more and more, and it's something you might want to keep in mind as you think through some of the options to present to potential clients or customers for their kitchen design. The number one activity limiting health condition in the country is back trouble, and bending over and leaning over to get things in and out of dishwashers is a problem, which is why we're actually pretty happy with front control, front loading clothes washers and dryers that proliferate these days as well, because you can modify their height up and down to customize to people's height and people's ability levels. So think about the dishwasher. That's not a slam dunk. And in our criteria, we don't mandate that people use that, but it's something to keep in mind. And it's worth noting that that thankfully this kitchen doesn't have a microwave oven installed over the stove, which is a typical location for that. Generally not a good idea from a universal design perspective because it's hot things coming out of something high up in the air and tough to reach. But you still have issues with even vents if it's externally vented, which we hope it is or not. Getting those controls accessible to folks who may have trouble reaching. So a thing to think about, a thing to maybe contend with, something you know that you might want to be mentioning to a certain household if you're having a conversation with them. One of the aspects of better living kitchens is the fact that it may look nice, you may think that they've got some nice features, but you may have a hard time putting your finger on exactly what it is about it that makes it so universal. And that's a successful universal kitchen, in fact. So in this kitchen, which is just one of dozens of types of kitchens that might have UD features, got under counter cabinet lighting, wall cabinet lighting, which adds more lighting to places where it's needed, which is always good. Added lighting in houses generally is a key feature of a BLD house. It's got one lowered seating space with some knee space underneath it that could be used by someone like maybe in this case grandma who can't stand for as long as a work surface. Certainly mom or dad could use that as a work surface. And it's got a wall oven that you can, I guess, obviously adjust the height of to modify this to be specific to people who are in there. And it's got enough maneuvering space within there to accommodate multiple cooks, and how some simple features can take you pretty far down the path of making a kitchen more usable for a wider range of folks. In fact, kitchens are one of the most difficult spaces in the house to completely adapt from being fully usable by standing folks to being fully usable by folks who are seated. And that's why in our UD approach, we don't attempt to go all that way, but we attempt to add more convenience features to capture a wider user range in the utility of the kitchens. So I said that we created Better Living Design to kind of get around the problems that people have in understanding what universal design is as it's applied to 1, 2, and 3 family housing. I said before, to be successful, we think projects have to wind up looking good and working well. If people walk into the project and it's distinctive in some stigmatizing and stereotypical way, you may not have been as successful as you may have wanted. It may be, in fact, that you have an accessible outcome, which in many cases you'll have to have, but maybe not a universal outcome. So it's got to look good and work well. It's got to preserve people's lifestyle. That's a key selling point, we think, for you talking to clients that people can respond to, even older clients who are so hypersensitive to these kinds of issues. We've talked about a little bit about flexibility and customization, how you can make changes over time in a UD or BLD house at far lower cost and far less hassle than a traditional standard home. You know, modifying a UD bathroom by adding grab bars is a very minimal cost add-on compared to having to expand the bathroom size and borrow space from the next room. And those examples go on and on and on throughout a UD house. That customization is much, much easier. And some households may respond to that, not all, but some might. Some might also respond to increased resale value. We've talked about the demographics and how more and more folks might be looking for homes with more convenience features. Well, that's only going to get more and more over time. So you're more likely, with a careful marketing job, to be able to capture future buyers that other households can't capture. I've talked about how it's not just for individual households, and sometimes it can be really difficult talking to an individual or others in a household about their own issues. It might be more easy to talk about families and friends who might need some of these features, and sometimes that's a winning combination. Ease of use, we've talked about comfort and convenience, kind of non-loaded phrases that we think carry some positive feelings for folks and we think they can be used successfully. As we said over and over, it's got to be appealing to a broad market of folks. It's got to be mainstreamed inside and out. If you're going forward thinking about how you're communicating to potential customers and clients, everyday activities, we talked about some of those just in terms of moving people and goods in and out of your house, ease of washing, improved storage options. I didn't mention, but the kitchen a minute ago that we showed you has, base cabinet drawer bases, which is increasingly common, but really a convenience feature. So improved storage options, improved work surface options, on and on and on. It will make a difference in the mainstream households, everyday activities. It also respects differences in people. We know that we're tall, we're short, we're wide, we're thin, we have great eyesight, we have not so great eyesight. This is just part of the normal span of the human condition. UD really does a good job at reflecting that diversity that's kind of built into the human condition. Mainstream marketability, I've mentioned that over and over and over again. That's really key. It's got to be seamless. The design features and products have to be integrated into the overall home design look. And if you're successful kind of up until that point, we think you'll be able to include these kinds of features in the homes and plans that you're developing. Stuff to avoid. There's good ways to approach people. We've listed some of those as some not so good ways to approach people. I talked about how people tend to be very hypersensitive regarding their own aging or their own inevitable increasing changes over time. And avoiding things like using handicapped or using the terms accessibility even, which should be neutral but isn't. ADA is kind of a loaded term also that doesn't really apply to housing anyway. If you're referring to people as frail, that's probably a turnoff for them. If you're talking about their own health problems, if they haven't brought it up, also not a terrific sales pitch for some of these features. And talking about whatever personal shortcomings may be glaringly obvious, but not offered forth by them or their own aging. Our market research has told us this, and all of our experience over 35 years says that folks just don't respond positively to those kinds of terms. That they'll turn off to what you're trying to sell them and move to somebody else who's not going to be talking about that. It really is a very delicate balance of taking their lead and knowing when to introduce certain features, certain concepts in your conversations and sales. So our ideal household for the kinds of home features we're talking about are mainstream households. We can bring all the others in. We've talked about those, but mainstream really is the key group we think that is untapped and is larger than any of the others. And they also don't want to talk about their own aging, don't care about accessibility features. That can't be part of your sales job. You will get a few households, and we all see these in our work, of what we call enlightened households, or households who are planners or early adopters, or folks who just don't have the kind of hang-ups that a lot of the rest of us do on thinking about their future or planning for their future. We're happy to have them. If they come to you looking for this, we'll talk about ways you can enhance that possibility. If they come to you, terrific. But most folks aren't that, so you have to really be prepared to work with folks in the situation that they're in now. And that's really one of our guiding principles, is meeting consumers where they are, not where we wish they were. We wish they were planners. They wish that they could look ahead in their home environment situation and do the planning that they need to do. Turns out not so many folks seem to be able to do that very easily. So meet them on their ground and their turf. We developed design criteria with Better Living Design to really put some flesh on the bones of these design concepts. And they cover 9 areas of home environments: exteriors and entrances, interior circulation, bathrooms, kitchens, laundry area, power and home technology, interior environmental quality, maintenance, switches, controls, and hardware. Really all the key areas we think that need to be paid attention to. We can't talk about all of these today. I'm certain that through our friends at House, we'll be able to get you a copy of the materials that we have if you're interested. So some of the areas that are mentioned in our criteria that you should keep in mind in a home like this, multi-story home. Some folks may be thinking, how could that match up against what the traditional mindset is of single-story living, slab-on-grade living? And in fact, it's not a perfect BLD house because it doesn't have access to all levels. What we like in Better Living Design is to have easy access on the reachable level of the house to key function areas that include kitchen, laundry, bathroom, and a bedroom area. And in fact, it could be an area that could be converted to a bedroom relatively easily. It could even be a bathroom that could be converted to a 3-fixture bathroom relatively easily. And it could even be an area that could have a laundry added to it easily. So we're pretty flexible about that. But in this case, clearly, those aren't all on one level. The house's footprint isn't that big. So what are they doing about that? So what they're doing is they are adding a 3-story closet that goes all the way to the ground level, and is a closet on the ground level, is a closet on the first floor pantry, and is a sitting area on the second floor of the house. So they pre-designed this as an elevator shaft, and it could be added in almost any renovation circumstance as well. You don't have to add the cost of an elevator now, but you could add it later on. It's not a perfect solution. In other situations where it isn't a 3-story house, and perhaps it isn't at the price point that might include this, we've configured stairs in ways that might have a stair lift added later on, and that's a much lower cost solution that adds a lot of functionality later. Those are custom accessibility things. Elevators, obviously, a little bit more universal in its concept and how it's regarded and how it's used. So we like that also. So this is one thing they did. So again, it's a sitting area for the meeting of the generations, which is a nice feature in the house anyway. And they also have, of course, stairs going up and down, and they've done a better job with the stairs. They've added lighting to the stairs. They have an added handrail on the stairs. They do have carpeting, which sometimes could be a problem, but they have low nap, tightly wrapped carpeting that reduces, I think, some of the slip potential of some of the carpeted stairs that you might traditionally find in a lot of homes. And here's a renovation situation with an entrance. So this is actually an 1890 farmhouse that the owner took advantage of the existing grade on the site. The front porch is about 6 feet above grade. The back porch where we're standing now is almost at grade. And so with some hardscaping and a nice gentle sloping walkway, I was able to bring people from the driveway in the back up to a step-free entrance all the way in the house, with a lot of the key function areas on that level as we like to see. So this is really an example of working with the existing site and coming up with a really positive outcome. Certainly technology is playing an increasing role in all of our lives, and no less the case now in dealing with the diverse issues of people, particularly with folks who are aging and others. Technology is finding its way into a surprising number of products. So the old simple kitchen faucet is now being supplanted by higher tech kitchen faucets. This is a Delta faucet that's part of their Touch 2.0 series. And we actually liked it enough to give it an award a few years ago as an innovator to bring what was then commercial technology into the residential context. And this is part of a number of manufacturers now make this kind of technology out there. And it's almost always advertised as a convenience feature, which it is indeed, and as a hygiene feature, which it is indeed. It's not often pitched from a ergonomics perspective. If you have limited use of your hands or fingers, maybe it's arthritis, maybe it's an aging issue or something else, this will let you turn the faucet on or off without having to reach all the way to the back and manipulate a handle of any kind. We like single lever faucets also, but this is even simpler. So technology plays a role there. We like it, and we'd like to see it proliferate more because we think that it has some real advantages for people from all walks of life. We also liked this Nest thermostat a few years ago enough to give them an award, a BLD award, because at the time they were pretty groundbreaking in bringing in this new ideas and a very basic, simple thing in most people's homes, which is a thermostat. And a lot of us are struggling with either old-fashioned traditional thermostat, but also the much more difficult to understand and programmable thermostats that were so popular for so many years, but so many of us had trouble using them, including me. So this featured vivid graphics, simple operation, not necessarily simple setup, but simple operation that has now been copied, at least in concept, by a lot of other manufacturers. It's simpler operation, easier user interface, and this, like a lot of other things, employs the technologies of wireless technology. So I can control my household heating and ventilating from half a world away if I wanted to, but certainly even when I'm not home. So that's a real advantage that we think is obviously huge, a small component of this huge area of home automation and home technology that's people need to know about. So from high tech to not so high tech, and again, in kitchens, it's relatively easy to pick from an array of existing features and technologies and options to create a very universal outcome without thinking about or needing to go to great lengths to discover what they are. So you've got a refrigerator towards the left here that's got side opening doors and a big pull-out freezer on the bottom that really brings a lot of stored items visually and physically to people, so you can get to stuff more easily. And again, back issues can be prevalent. You've got pull-out base cabinet drawers, much more popular now. You can see and reach stored items way easier than in traditional door-based cabinets. And with a cutting board that pulls out of various other work surfaces, you can create varying work surface heights for various family members at various points throughout your kitchen. And again, we have the examples of the wall oven that you can mount at a particular height specific to your family and the people who are using it. And in theory, even modify that over time to customize it. So not very high tech, very plain, very sensible, but very user friendly, and universal design. And we can help you package, we think, with this kind of design concept, the presenting features like this in a new way to clients and customers. Now, everybody can go overboard one time or another, and we've had clients that have done that unintentionally. We had a client who thought then, as a lot of people still do now, well, if safety in bathrooms and tubs matters, and if we associate that with grab bars, then if one grab bar is good, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grab bars must be really good. Well, from our perspective, a particular user might need that, and maybe they knew someone who was coming to visit. I don't think so. But I think that they just got the idea that they needed to go overboard with this. We, in fact, don't prefer people to have grab bars mounted in homes at first occupancy unless they've got someone right now who needs them. Wait till someone needs them and you can put them in at the height you want. And certainly not in this number. I mean, a mainstream household might be off-put by this. That's our opinion. So you can go too far with some of this stuff. We'll talk in a minute about where we think the grab bar situation is evolving into shortly. So 5 grab bars, that wasn't bad enough to have a fold down seat. All high function for certain folks, but maybe too far. You got to think about that. We do like the fact that they have a handheld shower. We like handheld showers because they add a whole lot of options to your bathing. And we like the fact that it's mounted to a grab bar. So if someone slips and falls, they grab that handheld shower grab bar that it's attached to, they're going to find a secure thing to hang on to. And we like the fact that the mix valve is offset, which again gets back to this back trouble, bending and reaching issue. So it's a little easier to get that mix valve attended to. There's some good and bad in here, and I hope you can take away that from this presentation. Where we think the grab bar situation is going to is the things we're calling handholds, which can take the form of kind of a soap dish installed in a bathtub or shower, and actually a masquerading handhold. You can put your hands very securely mounted, put your hand on there for balance, to tug on if you need to, but clearly better looking than those grab bars you saw in the prior slide. And even other parts of the bathroom, something like this, which has this handhold as the top curved portion and a very specifically designed towel bar underneath that. So it's a dual function with a clear communication about what each is to be used for. So in terms of how you can communicate to your customers, I think the last thing you want to do is have you bring up unbidden some of these issues in a conversation with them, and they've heard it from you for the first time. You want to have them hearing it from you maybe the 3rd or 4th time. And one way you can do that is by prepping them through your website, is to make sure you've got stuff on the website that shows them that you know the difference between accessible design. Maybe you do that. Maybe you've got a lot of mixed projects you can show them, and universal design, so you don't confuse them. You can sell the UD to your appropriate clients and customers on that side, and you can sell your accessibility knowledge and functions to folks on the other side if that's the way your business runs. I think website and any other sales materials you have are key areas to get people prepped for the conversations which might be happening later on. And standard questions that you really can turn to a UD type of advantage. How long you're planning to stay there? Have they considered ease of use, convenience features? What do they know about them? Do they have any ideas themselves? Have they thought about more convenient storage? What we've already seen here, you may know about many more. Have they considered alternate work surface heights to better accommodate people at various heights? Have they thought about tubs versus showers? Have they thought about curbless showers? Curbless showers are a very hot feature right now, and lots of people like them, and it may be a great sell for a bath renovation. Or lighting. In general, houses are underlit and badly lit, and adding more lumens we think is a great thing to do, especially if it's variable. Non-variable, you can get a lot of glare going on, but variable lighting will make a difference. And who doesn't like non-slip flooring? Who's going to be asking you for slippery flooring, non-slip, very UD, lots of options there. We get the question about costs all the time, and it's an exceedingly difficult one to answer quantitatively in a renovation situation, because renovations are renovations. The costs are all over the map, and every project is different. In new construction, the conventional wisdom is 0 to 5%, and that's largely due to product selection, but it can vary widely depending upon the kind of home plan and home size price point that you're starting with. It could be virtually 0 because of the cost of the house. It could be as much as 5%. And we've worked at all price point homes to kind of demonstrate the efficacy of what we're talking about. In renovation, there's some obvious big cost factors that still are product choices, because in almost every area you can pick a more ergonomically useful and appropriate and kind of future-oriented product that can cost more than the standard vanilla products. And so you can add a lot of functionality that way, but also a lot of cost. Happily, we think the products don't really define in the hugest way the usability of a particular space. So that doesn't have to be the limiting factor, but it's something to keep in mind. Obviously, if you're changing the size of spaces, that's a lot of cost, particularly if they're bearing walls. Moving utilities can be very costly. Moving plumbing, moving electrical service, anything like that can add. And if you're moving walls and making wall adjustments, that can come into play. In new construction, we like to say that getting in the house is the single biggest cost, engineering, and design challenge, because in new construction, once you get inside, it's not really that challenging to design a UD house. Same is the case, and maybe even more so in renovation circumstances. Figuring out an elegant way to get in a house can be a challenge, and obviously some houses are quite a bit more challenging than others. We've seen enough examples of successful, elegant step-free entrances that really meet the UD and BLD criteria that we're confident that a lot more homes than people might think can be successful. But I know for a lot of people that you don't want to come in with your project at a higher price point than the owner is expecting necessarily, or that the market can bear. And there's a real balancing act between adding functionality, adding features, adding value, and convincing your customers that there's a lot of value being added in what you're talking about compared to the next guy or gal who's talking to them about their projects. So we're very sensitive to that being important to be considering. So where do you learn more about this? This is obviously an area. We're obviously one. We set up our institute specifically for that purpose. We are very active online and with our newsletters, and we have a lot of materials we could get to people. We'd be happy to do that. On House, we actually have a page on House, and there's a bunch of other pages on House that we think probably you could visit. We have great examples of several projects that you should be able to look at that expand on some of my conversations today in this particular presentation. Our website is betterlivingdesign.org. You can visit us there. Our sister organization, the Universal Design Institute, which has more of a focus on accessible home design, and we know a lot of you will do mixed projects with both accessibility features and UD features, and you might have part of your business that's focused on accessible home design. We're a national resource for information about that. And we do lots of trainings from both platforms. This being one of them, we do all kinds of detailed trainings on entries alone, on kitchens alone, on bathrooms, and so on. So you can look for us and where those are happening and how you can get signed on to them. The University of Buffalo has trainings through their Idea Center. You could, through us, actually, we typically announce them, but you look on their website and see what they're up to. And I happen to know that the National Association of Home Builders is revising their Universal Design Build class for debuting in 2019. And I know that because I am working on that right now. So stay tuned. It should be really great. I'll just have to say that. And if you kind of want to see a very intensive day or two on what this is all about, that's a great option for you. AARP, in terms of how you meet the needs of your customers and clients, does have a lot of resources online. They've been pushing this issue for many, many years, giving lots of reasons for folks to think about it and lots of examples. So inviting them to cruise online, or you do it yourself and see what areas might be most useful would be, I think, very, very, very helpful. We'd like in our organization, our mission is to create more and more houses like this and more communities like this, not just one house at a time, but entire communities that have homes like this, whether they're newly constructed or renovated. And we're trying to alter how consumers perceive great design. The great design in the future needs to be with a BLD or a UD infusion in it, I think, for people to see that it's good. If it doesn't have you build a home in the future, it doesn't have some of these features, I think folks might question kind of what the value is. So, I mean, another way to consider what we're all about is that universal design reflects the understanding that variation in human form and performance is ordinary and expected. You ought to act that way. Don't act like it's such a big deal to be thinking about these things, including it in homes. Just do it. There's our contact information. We'd be happy to converse with anyone. Sign up for our newsletters, of course, and there's a lot of the platforms that we're on now that you can contact us through and with, and you can see all of our postings that come out. I'm going to turn it back to the house staff. I think we've got some questions that have come in for us to be thinking about.
Yes. First up, I see a question from Carly, and she's asking, is universal design part of aging in place? What do you think, Richard?
I think it is. I think that universal design is really one way that people can achieve that lifestyle option of aging in place, because that's really what they're talking about. When people think about aging in place, they want to stay in the home they're in now, maintain their same lifestyle. How can they do that? And obviously, as you've learned today, the house and the environment of the home can have a great impact on people's ability to carry out their day-to-day activities, maintain their day-to-day activities, whether it's inside the house, outside the house, in the yard, maintaining all the traditional things they need to be doing. And UD can really help that happen. And if the customization is needed later on, clearly that can happen at much lower cost and much more easily if they're already in a UD house.
Great, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I see one more question from Martin, who asks, when is the appropriate time to implement universal design features?
Early is good. You really don't want to be the first one bringing up any of these ideas to a household. That tends to make for a pretty steep educational curve that you have to be pushing on. And we think that your website and your marketing and sales materials can be powerful preparation for a household to learn about what you're about and what you can bring to the table. And if they've gone to your website, if they're kind of aware of what you're talking about, and they're aware just of how kind of mainstream a lot of these features and products are, they may easily gravitate towards kind of the package that you want to deliver to them that's universal and different from what perhaps most other of your competitors might be bringing to the table.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Richard. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise. It was great to, deep dive into this subject. And thank you to our audience for attending today's webinar. We'll certainly send out that document that Richard shared earlier in the presentation. We hope to see you at a future webinar.